Hi, I'm Kelly Drake, and today I'm outside collecting a few things to take into the studio and show you how to mix colors from nature. Green is especially difficult for people who are just starting to paint with watercolors, and even people who've been painting for a while. It'll be a good experience to go through the different greens and try to mix those so that they look natural. Also, we have a lot of flowers right now out in the yard, including these beautiful purple lupin. And I'm going to collect a few things like that too, so that we're not only doing greens, we're also doing some of these beautiful bright colors that are in nature. And show you that even those need a little bit of a mixing of colors, and usually you don't get those colors right out of the tube, even though it's kind of tempting to try to do that. Keep in mind that outside colors change depending on the light, and that we're just going to go into the studio and use flat lighting today. So that's just kind of a start in mixing those colors, and know that they will change depending on what time of day it is, what the weather's like, etc. So we're just going to have a place to start today with those colors, and then I'll do another video in the future where we're outside in different lights, and we'll see how that goes. So I'm starting out with three primary colors that I like to mix other colors from, and that's cerulean blue and a quinacridone rose, which is a really nice pinkish red color. And then I want a lemony yellow. So I'm going to use cadmium lemon because that's the most light lemony yellow that I have. So I'm just going to put them here in my mixing tray, on a nice clean mixing tray, so that I have room to mix other colors. I think I'll start out with a green, and so I'm going to start out with some of these really nice lupin leaves. And here they are in the studio, and look how much that colors change from outside to the studio. And that's basically just a change in light, and outside it's a little sunny when I filmed that, and in here it's more flat like when I started filming, when it was really overcast out. So you can see how different colors can be with the different lights. But we're just going to mix this in the studio and see what local color we can come up with. And so I've mixed a green there, and you could tell that wasn't a very natural green. The minute I mixed the blue and yellow, it was really pretty bright. So I'm going to make sure to put in a little red, which is the complementary color of that green, and just neutralize that color a little bit so that it's a little more natural. And you tend to do this a lot with the natural colors out in your garden or out in nature. You mix the color, and then you mix a little bit of its complement in to neutralize that color and make it look a little more natural. So now I just decided that was a little bit light, so I'm trying to mix a darker version of that, a little darker value. Got a little bit darker. And now I'm taking more blue right out of the tray, and some red and a little bit of yellow, and mixing an even more neutral green to put into that wet and wet color, and see if I can get a little darker, a little more neutral. Now this is some fern that I have out in the yard, and ferns are kind of fun to paint because of the shapes, but also just looking at the green, I'm pretty close to this green. I think there's maybe just a little bit more yellow in it than what I had for the lupin leaf. Yeah, it looks a little bit more yellow and a little bit lighter in value than the lupin leaf. And you can see that up close there. And this leaf has such a nice texture to it. It'll be really fun to paint when I decide to paint the actual shape, but I'm just going to do a little bit of representation there of the color. Now this is my Japanese maple, and it is lace leaf, so it has really interesting little delicate leaves, and some are more light green than others. This one I chose is very light green and very much of a yellow green, so I'm going to add even a little bit of yellow in there, and kind of try to mimic the lacy shape there a little bit. So I use some of the green, the neutralized green that I already mixed for the above leaves, and just add a little bit of this or that to change it for the different leaves. And I find that that works really well usually. Now I'm looking at this stem, and it's interesting that the stem is a really pretty red, which is a complementary to that green. And there's a lot of leaves like this that have the green and red, as if nature kind of knew that green and red offset each other and that they look brighter and more beautiful when they're right next to each other. Or maybe we noticed that from nature, I'm not sure. So now I've mixed kind of a neutral red by putting a little bit of green in there, a little bit of blue, and I'm making it a little more purpley to go over that. Because this red, it's hard to see because its stem is so narrow, so thin, but it has a little bit of the purpley red in there. It has a little bit of the orangey red, so I'm also mixing an orangey red with the yellow there to put over the top. Now looking at this clover, I thought I'd just try to do that little flower and show you how, even though it's a really beautiful purple, it's probably not a purple right out of the tube. You might find something somewhat close, but it's very easy to mix with your 3 primary colors. So I'm just going to take what I already have here. Oh, we're looking at the leaves. I'm going to take what I already have here with this nice pinky red and mix a little bit of blue in with it, just to make it a little more purple. I don't think it really has to be neutralized, so I don't think we have to put any yellow in there, any complement to make it more neutral. Yeah, actually that color looks very close to what the clover looks like in real life. So now I'm looking at this sorrel out in my yard, and I love the different colored leaves, the really bright yellow-green along with the blue-green. And then also, if you look at it closely, it has some red in it, which kind of neutralizes the green, and in some places, with the new leaves, it's even more red. So it makes really beautiful foliage and really interesting to paint. So I'm going to give it a try. Just take one leaf off here, or a couple little leaves and a big one, and see what I can do. So I'm going to start out with more cerulean blue, and I'm going to start out actually mixing kind of a violet purple with this, and then a little bit of the yellow, just to start out with a darker green. And that just turned out to be the perfect green to go over the lupin leaf and just darken that a little bit. So went over that with another layer before adding more yellow for the sorrel leaf. And if you're really painting this sorrel leaf, you want to try to get some of that waxy quality of it. So you would leave a little bit of white on that to show the shine of the light on the leaf. Right now I'm just looking for the color, the general color, so I'm just going to paint it all in. But keep that in mind when you're painting kind of waxy surfaces, to leave some white here and there to show that reflection. And first time around got a little too yellow, a little mossy, so I put a little more blue-green in there. And this is a little trick you can use with the end of your brush, is just to put it into the wet and wet paint and draw it out to create that sawed edge, that kind of sawtooth edge. Now back to the stem, just wanted to get a little darker, so I put a little more of that neutralized red in, the red and green mixed. And that turned out to be such a nice red that I thought I'd use it for the tips of this Japanese maple and use a smaller brush to get that lacy effect. So all in all, I did pretty well here with my 3 primary colors, getting pretty close to these natural colors that I found out in the garden. And so I'm gonna set this down, let it dry, and grab another page of another art journal to start round 2. So I'm gonna start out, I was really fascinated by this new growth on the fir tree and what different greens are on each branch. And so I thought I'd take samples of both of those and see how difficult it is to mix these two different greens. So first of all, I have the new really bright yellow green on the top, the new growth, and then I have the mature growth below, which is much more of what you think of as fir tree color, which is more of a blue-green or a blue-gray green. So starting out, I'm gonna use my green mixing tray down here again, put some of the lemon yellow and some of the cerulean blue together, and try to mix that yellow-green of the new growth. So I have a really nice yellow-green here. I'm just gonna compare it to that. And it's like it'll look a little more natural if I put a tiny bit of red in, just to mix in some of that complementary color. And it seems like it needs just a tiny bit more yellow, so I'm just going to put all that yellow in. And I'm thinking I might overemphasize the yellow of this yellow-green for the new growth, just to make sure I have enough contrast between that and the more mature growth on the same sprig. So here's my yellow-green for the new growth, and now I'm going to start to mix the more mature color below here. So obviously it needs quite a bit more blue, so I'm going to add that first and see how it looks. And it's looking good, it's just looking a little more of bright and unnatural again, so I'm going to mix a little bit more of the complement in again too, a little bit of red. Usually need very little of this to change that color to a more natural color, so use it sparingly. And still needs a little bit more yellow. And now it's starting to look a lot like that color to me. Need a tiny bit more. So you just keep working until your eye, to your eye, it looks right. And to me that looks very close. Probably this watercolor will dry a little light, and so I might want to add another layer over the top later, but for now this is a good start. So now I have some of this fern. It's a little bit different fern from what I had before, and it looks like pretty similar to the color above, except a little bit more yellow, kind of similar to what happened with the sorrel leaf and the fern that I did before. So I added a little yellow to the green that I had there, and a little bit of red to neutralize it, and looking at the fern looked like it got a little too yellowish gray color. So I mixed a little bit more blue in, and now it's pretty close. So I'm going to go ahead and put some of these fern shapes in because it's fun. And a little bit of that texture. And again, this color looks really nice, but it's probably going to dry a little light, so I might go back later, put another layer on. And here are my daylilies that are such a beautiful bright yellow. And just want to show you that this takes just a tiny bit of mixing to make it the right yellow and to give it some interest, even though you could probably take a medium lemon, like a cadmium medium lemon, Aurelian right out of the tube, and it would look pretty good. You want to mix a little bit of color in there just to give it some interest, whether it's warm or cool. So I'm going to mix first a cooler yellow. Even though this yellow is pretty cool, I'm going to mix just I'm going to do a little bit of a warmer yellow first. Mix a little bit of that red in to the yellow to make it a little warmer. Doesn't take a lot, just a tiny bit of red to make that happen. And now I have a little bit more of an orangey yellow for that petal. I'm just going to paint it on right there. And for the other one, as you see on its side there, it takes on a little bit of a cooler yellow cast. So I'm going to start out with my lemon yellow and add a tiny bit of the cerulean blue to make it cooler. And it just doesn't take much, you know, it just starts to look a little bit more of a green yellow, and that's all you need. That's very close to this yellow lily petal. So I'm just going to paint that one down here. You see just a little bit of the cool yellow, a little bit of the warm yellow looks really good together, but there's just enough difference to make it interesting. So now I'm going to try something that I think is really difficult in watercolor until you've done it for a little while, and that is how to paint white. White daisies, especially when they're blown out like these here. I'm going to cool it down a little bit. Don't have a ton of detail in those petals. It's quite a flat flower. There's just a little bit of layering going on, and it seems like all the excitement's going on in the middle. So that's where we'll start. We'll start with the yellows that I've already mixed, some of that green cool yellow, and paint the center of the flower and then go from there. So there's some of that cool green yellow that I've already mixed. Put a little bit of the warmer yellow in the center, and then right in the center, I use a smaller brush, put a little bit of very, very light green and all around as it's yellow, as it's drying. And that just gives it a little bit of depth there in the middle. Now I'm mixing a neutral from blue and red and a little bit of yellow, just to make a cool neutral, and just start to put a little bit of those shadows in that you see on the petals. That's all I'm really seeing as far as color here, is a little bit of a cool neutral, maybe a little warm neutral. So that's what I'm going to start out with. And then, as that seems a little boring to me, I'm going to paint in a little bit of the background color and carve out the white petals out of the background. So that's what I'm using this cerulean blue for, just as if it's kind of against a light blue sky. And already it's starting to come out. The form is starting to come out, and it's starting to look a little more exciting. So I'm just going to let that dry for a little bit while I paint something else, just so I can come back and put a little more detail in later. Now these were out in my garden. I can't remember what they're called, I'm sorry. I think it's penstamen. But they have very beautiful little cup-like flowers, and I love this color. And you can see it looks just like what I have here in my palette already. So just very little mixing involved here, maybe a little more pink in the purpley color that I've mixed there with the pink and blue, and actually now maybe a little more blue, and it looks like I've got a color very close to that. So, and then you can always mix a little more blue, a little more pink here and there to just create kind of highlight colors or accent colors. So now back to the daisy. This is dried, and so I have my neutral, and I'm just going in real lightly and putting in a little bit of shading where the one petal overlaps another. Now I'm making a warmer neutral by mixing a little more red, a little more yellow into that blue. And it's good to mix your neutrals up a little bit and see what you get. It usually makes everything a little more interesting. And if you're interested in how to mix a lot of different kinds of neutrals and use those to paint clouds, I'll put a link to my other video up top here so you can see that. It goes in more specifically about mixing neutrals. So now just putting a little bit of detail in, just some interest in these daisy petals. And now I mixed a little darker neutral so I could put a little more contrast in, because it was all looking about the same value. And contrast is really going to help this to look like it's not just flat. And a little more contrast in closer to the middle of the flower. So now it seems like it needs more contrast with the color too. So I'm going to put a little more color on the outside of the flower. And why just stop at sky blue? I decided to go ahead and gradate that blue into a purpley color in the background. So actually I think painting white is really fun in watercolors, because you can use your imagination, you can add a little color. I'm putting some of that purple into the petals now to give it a little more interest. And you can kind of go a little more wild with what you want to do with your colors and your texture and your background. And yeah, that daisy I think is looking quite nice, and you can definitely tell that the petals are white and that the center is kind of a greenish yellow. So almost done here with the daisy. I think what I'll do is lift this one petal that I started to paint out so it's a little lighter, and just kind of use some of that neutral to do light outlines of these petals down below. This is somewhat out of laziness. I just don't want to paint the entire flower right now, and partly just to remind myself I don't really want it to be the same all the way around, and maybe I just want part of it to be in such detail. Now back to the lupin flowers. I love the changes in purple within these lupin flowers. As you can see in this sample, there's red purple and blue purple, and even lighter bits of purple that you would call lavender. So this will be a really fun one to mix, and actually a quite easy one to mix because I don't think you have to neutralize the colors much, if at all. So I'm going to get more of that cerulean blue down here where I'm mixing my purples, and mix in some more of that quinacridone rose. And first I have this cool violet blue, which is one of my favorite colors. And just going to put some of those petals in that are more of that blue violet. And then it's pretty simple, as you can see, to just bring some of that rose down and mix more of a red purple, and then you can get some of those other petals that are in between. Now I'm bringing more blue down, more red, and trying to mix the same blue violet a little bit darker. And that's what I'm putting into the center here, the smaller little petals. So this is the salal, back to the salal in my yard, and I just love these little teardrop pink flowers, or flower buds. They're just a really interesting shape and an interesting combination of colors. So with this, I need to basically use the pink that I have, the quinacridone rose, and just mix a little bit of that yellow in to make it a little more orangey, because this pink was a little too bright pink for this flower. So just mixing in a little bit of yellow and a tiny bit of that purple that I've already mixed. And that purple is going to make it a little cooler and a little darker, so that I can use it for some of the little darker parts that are on the right side there. And needed a little more quinacridone rose to squeeze some of that out of the tube and get some stronger color there. So here's the stem and some of the pieces that are a little darker in color there. And now I'm getting some of the color that I mixed for the little, almost like lanterns. And I really don't have to fill these in completely. I'm using a little more water with these and leaving a little more white so that they appear lighter on the paper. So here I'm done with this page, and pretty happy with the way most of these colors turned out. I'm especially happy with the yellow lilies. You can almost feel like there's 4 petals sitting there instead of 2. So the only thing I'm thinking is that, as I said before, the greens have dried a little more pale than what I was hoping. So I think I might go over the greens with another layer of color. So here's my new growth from the fir tree, and I have a nice yellow green here. And I'm just going to use a smaller brush to put in some of those needle shapes over the top of my wash here, and add a little color, add a darker value, and add some texture to this all at the same time. As I said, I did mix this a little more yellow than what the actual plant looks like, just to make sure there's contrast between that and the more mature growth below. And I do think that would be better in a painting. Although I am putting a little more blue-green over the top here just to make it look a little more like what that looks like in real life. Now I have more of my blue-green neutralized with a little bit of the quinacridone rose, and using the same method over the top here with my smaller brush, just putting in some of those needle shapes and adding texture, a darker value, and a little more of that blue-green color over the top here. And I think that's going to look better when it's done. And now with the Fern, same thing. I mixed more of that. It's almost an army green, and so it's that same blue-green that I had before that I mixed for the fur, but added some yellow and a teeny bit of red, and now just going over those leaves and making the details a little more prominent, and deepening the color here, making it a little richer looking. So sometimes with your colors, you might be very happy with your color when it's wet, but when it dries a little pale, and that's really not a big deal because you can always go over with another layer, which to me gives it more dimension oftentimes, and just makes for a more interesting painting anyway. So those pale washes that you start out with are just fine, and just know that you're going to go back later after they're dry and put more color in where it needs it. So I hope you enjoyed the presentation today, and I think this is a really good thing to give a try at home, and really good practice for mixing your colors from primaries. And now don't forget to subscribe if you'd like to see more videos like this, and stop by and check out my webpage, my Facebook page, or take a look at my Instagram account if you'd like to learn more about me, my art, and my children's book illustrations.